I remember that night mostly as a feeling that everything had already slipped too far out of my hands before I even understood it. Like I was just sitting there waiting for the next bad thing to show up. The rain coming down so hard it blurred the whole street into shaking lights while I sat on that cold bus stop bench trying to stay upright, my body sore, my head heavy, my chest tight in a way that made it hard to breathe. And right in front of me, Emma stood there holding that same worn teddy bear she never let go of, her pink dress damp, even though I kept pulling my jacket tighter around her, her little boots splashing in the puddles like this was just another night and not the moment everything had fallen apart. And when she looked up and asked me why I was crying, I wiped my face out of habit, but honestly, I couldn't tell anymore what was rain and what wasn't. I told her I was just tired, but the truth was nothing in my life was okay, not even close. 3 days earlier, I lost my job at the diner for missing too many shifts, the same shifts I stayed home because she was sick and I had no one to leave her with. And then yesterday, our landlord changed the locks, like we didn't matter. Everything we owned, stuffed into trash bags and left outside. I grabbed what I could, one suitcase, one backpack, and left the rest behind. Her toys, our pictures, all the small things that used to make life feel normal. Somewhere along the way, my phone died, so even if there was someone to call, I couldn't. All I had left was $17 in my pocket, and a 3-year-old looking at me like I could still fix this, but I couldn't. My parents were gone, my brother was across the country barely holding on himself, and the shelter told me earlier they were full with a waiting list. At least 2 weeks. 2 weeks out here with her, and just thinking about that made my chest tighten so bad I thought I might pass out. I kept asking myself how it got this bad when I had done everything I was supposed to do. I worked, I tried, I kept going, but the moment I got pregnant, her father disappeared, and things just kept slipping. Slowly at first, and then all at once. And when Emma tugged my sleeve and said she was hungry, something inside me cracked, because I knew I could maybe feed her tonight, maybe in the morning. But after that I had nothing. And when she reached up with her cold little hand and told me not to cry, she looked past me and said, maybe that man could help us, and I followed her eyes and saw him standing there under a black umbrella, clean, dry, like the rain just didn't touch him the way it was hitting us, watching us in a way that wasn't pity, not exactly, just focused, like he was trying to figure something out. I told her we couldn't bother strangers, but even saying it felt pointless, and before I could stop her, she was already walking toward him, stepping through the water like she wasn't afraid of anything. I tried to stand, but my legs felt weak from the cold, and the hours sitting there, the man crouched down to her level, and that's when something in me snapped back into place. I forced myself up and moved toward them, because no matter how tired I wasn't letting her face that alone. And when she looked at him and said, my mommy is crying because we don't have a house anymore. Can you help us? I felt my face burn like I wanted to disappear. I tried to stop her, but it was already out there. And when he looked up at me, really looked this time, something in his eyes shifted. Not soft, not hard either, just sharp and steady, like he had already decided something before either of us said another word. And in that moment I realized I wasn't sure if we had just made a mistake, or if this was the first time all night something might actually change. I remember how hard it was to say those words, like my voice didn't even belong to me anymore when I told him I was sorry, and that my daughter didn't understand, that we were fine. Even though nothing about us looked fine, and I think he knew that the second he saw us, because he didn't argue or raise his voice. He just looked at me in this calm, steady way, and asked when the last time we ate was. And I swear I tried to lie. I really did. I opened my mouth, ready to say something easy, like we had just eaten, but nothing came out because I was too tired to pretend. And something about him made it feel useless anyway, like he would see right through me before I even finished the sentence. And before I could say anything, Emma answered for me in that honest way only kids have, saying, "We had crackers that morning from a gas station, but they weren't even the good kind." And I remember feeling this mix of shame and helplessness because I didn't even have the energy to stop her or correct her. I just stood there watching it all unfold like I had already lost control of everything. And then he stood up slowly, still holding that umbrella, and looked at me in a way that made my chest tighten again. Not fear this time, just something softer, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Real kindness, the kind that doesn't ask questions first. And when he told me his name was James Thornon, it sounded familiar in a distant way, but I couldn't place it. My head was too full and too empty at the same time, and I heard myself say we didn't need charity, even though that wasn't true at all. We needed anything, everything. But the words came out automatically, like some last piece of pride I hadn't let go of yet. And he didn't push back hard. He just said it wasn't charity, just basic human decency, and asked me when the last time we slept indoors was. And that question hit harder than I expected because I had to admit it had only been the night before at a bus station until security kicked us out, like we didn't belong there either. And I saw his jaw tighten when he looked down at Emma, standing there, soaking wet and trying to be brave. And then he said there was a hotel a few blocks away, and asked us to come with him, said he could get us a room, something warm to eat, and we could figure everything else out in the morning after we rested. And I immediately told him I couldn't pay him back because that was the only thing I could think to say, like I needed to set that boundary before I accepted anything. But he looked at me and said he wasn't asking for anything back. He just wanted me to let him help. And when he said please, that word hit me harder than anything else because he wasn't looking down on us. He wasn't forcing anything. He was asking, and I realized how long it had been since anyone had spoken to me, like I still had a choice. So I said yes, quietly, barely even a whisper, but I meant it. And I saw the tension leave his face like he had been waiting for that answer. He stepped closer and held the umbrella over all of us, and told us his car was nearby, that we shouldn't walk in the rain. And when I saw the car, I understood right away the kind of world he came from. A black Mercedes, clean, polished, the kind you notice when it passes you on the street, but never imagine sitting inside. And I felt suddenly aware of how I looked, soaked, dirty, out of place, like I didn't belong anywhere near something like that. But he didn't hesitate. He opened the door, helped me get Emma settled, and when I noticed the car seat already there, I couldn't help but ask. And he said it was for his nephew, that he sometimes picked him up from school. Just simple, normal, like he lived in a completely different version of life. And as he drove through the rain, I sat in the back holding Emma's hand, trying to make sense of it all, because none of this felt real. People like him don't just stop for people like me. They don't step into your worst moment and change its direction. But somehow, that's exactly what was happening. And when we pulled up to the Grand View, I felt that same disbelief all over again, because it was the kind of place I had only ever walked past, without thinking twice. The lobby bright, polished, people inside clean and put together, and as we walked in, I could feel every eye, even if no one was actually staring. And when the man at the desk greeted James like he already knew him, called him by name, I realized this wasn't just a kind stranger. This was someone who belonged in places like this, someone with a life I couldn't even imagine. And when he said he needed a suite, just like that, like it was nothing, I felt something shift again, like maybe this night wasn't done changing yet. I didn't feel relieved when he said a week. I felt scared, because that's the kind of help that changes everything, and I wasn't sure I was allowed to accept something like that. I remember shaking my head almost immediately, telling him it was too much, that one night was already more than enough. But he didn't argue, didn't explain, He just repeated it like it was already decided, calm and steady. And somehow that made it harder to refuse because it didn't feel like pressure. It felt like certainty. And then he turned back to the front desk and started asking for clothes. Something small for Emma and something for me. And when he looked at me, I had to force myself to answer because my mind was still trying to catch up. I hadn't even processed the room yet, and now he was making sure we had something clean to wear, something normal, something we hadn't had in days. And before I could gather myself again, he was already ordering food, real food, hot food, not the kind you grab just to survive, but the kind you sit down and eat. And when he added hot chocolate for Emma, I felt something twist inside my chest. Because he wasn't just helping, he was paying attention. He was thinking about her like she mattered. And I stood there realizing I didn't even know how to respond to that kind of care anymore. And the way the clerk spoke to him, quick, respectful, like this wasn't unusual for him, made it clear this wasn't a stretch for him. This was just another decision he could make without thinking twice. And when we walked into the suite, I slowed down without meaning to because everything felt too clean, too quiet, like if I touched something I might ruin it. And I caught myself wondering how long it had been since I had been somewhere that didn't feel temporary or uncertain. And then Emma ran ahead and saw the bathtub, and her whole face lit up like it was the best thing she had ever seen. And that hit me harder than anything else because it reminded me how little it actually takes for a child to feel happy, just warmth, just safety, just something that feels steady. And for a second I had to look away because I wasn't sure I deserved to stand in a place like that with her. And when James told us to get cleaned up and said he would wait outside, I finally asked the question that had been sitting in my chest the whole time. Why? Why us? Why now? And he didn't answer right away. He paused, like he had to step back into something he didn't visit often. And when he spoke, his voice changed, quieter, heavier, like it carried weight he was used to holding. He told me 4 years ago he lost someone. And there was something in the way he said it that made me stop thinking about myself for a second. Because loss like that doesn't sound dramatic. It sounds simple and final. And he told me before she passed, she made him promise that if he ever saw someone who truly needed help, he wouldn't hesitate. No questions, no conditions, just help. And when he looked at me after saying that, I realized this wasn't about being generous. This was about keeping a promise. And that made it feel different, more serious somehow. And when I asked who she was, he told me she was his wife, Elena. And I could hear it, the kind of pain that doesn't fade. It just settles into your voice and stays there, he said. She spent her life helping people who had nothing, trying to fix things that most people walk past without noticing. And after she was gone, he just kept trying to live in a way that wouldn't let that promise disappear. And I didn't know what to say, except I was sorry. Because there are moments where words don't fix anything, but you still say them anyway. And when he said he was sorry for me too, that he could see I had lost more than just a place to stay, that almost broke me more than anything else, because it meant he saw it, not just the situation, but everything underneath it. And I just nodded because I didn't trust myself to speak without falling apart again. So he told me to go to take care of Emma, to get warm. And this time, I didn't hesitate. I walked into that bathroom like I was stepping into something I didn't fully believe was mine. I washed Emma first, slowly, carefully, like I was trying to give her back something we had lost over the past few days, and she just laughed, playing with the bubbles like none of it had ever touched her. And I realized maybe kids don't carry things the same way we do. Maybe they go faster because they trust someone else is holding it for them. And when it was my turn, I stood under the hot water longer than I should have, letting it run over my face, my shoulders, my back, and for a few seconds I just stood there not moving because it was the first moment all day I didn't feel cold or scared, and I didn't want it to end. And when we stepped out, the clothes were already there, clean, soft, simple. And I noticed how Emma kept touching the fabric, like she wasn't used to it anymore. And that hit me in a way I wasn't ready for. And then I saw the food, all of it laid out, more than we could possibly finish. And for a second, I just stood there because I couldn't remember the last time I didn't have to think about how to stretch a meal. And Emma's reaction, that excitement, that pure happiness over something so basic, made me realize how close we had come to having nothing left at all. And James sat with us while we ate, not distant, not awkward, just present, talking to Emma like she mattered, asking her small questions, making her laugh in a way that felt easy, natural. And with me, he didn't push, he didn't dig, he just gave me space. And somehow that made it easier to talk, easier to let something out. And before I even noticed, I was telling him about the diner, about how it wasn't much, but it kept us going, and how everything started slipping when Emma got sick, and I had to choose between staying with her or keeping my job. And no matter what I did, it felt like I was losing something either way. I think the moment it really hit me wasn't when I lost the job. It was when I heard myself explain it out loud and realized how small everything had become, how every tip I made barely kept us afloat, and how one missed shift turned into two, and then suddenly I was standing there being told I was no longer needed, no warning, no room to fix it, just done. And I remember thinking I'd recover, that I always did. But this time there was nowhere to land, because without someone to watch Emma, I couldn't hold a job, and without a job, everything else followed. Rent, food, any sense of control I thought I had. And when the locks changed on that door, it didn't feel like bad luck anymore. It felt like the end of something I couldn't rebuild on my own. And sitting there now, with real food in front of me, saying all of that out loud, I felt almost disconnected from it, like I was telling someone else's story. And when James asked about family, I had to pause, because there's never a simple way to answer that. I told him my parents were gone, that it happened when I was 19, and even now, it still feels unfinished somehow, like a part of me stayed back there. I mentioned my brother, but it didn't feel like help, because he's barely holding on himself. Different place, same kind of struggle, and when it came to Emma's father, I stopped, because I didn't want those words to land in front of her again, but James understood without me finishing, and that silence said more than anything I could have explained. And then he asked what I studied, and that question caught me off guard because I hadn't let myself think about that version of me in a long time. I told him nursing, that I was halfway through before everything shifted, before I had to choose between finishing school and taking care of my child. And I chose her because there was no other real choice. I said I planned to go back someday, but even as I said it, I could hear how far away that sounded. And when he repeated it, that I wanted to be a nurse, it didn't feel like he was asking. It felt like he was reminding me of something I had slowly stopped believing. And that hit deeper than I expected, because it's been a long time since anyone looked at me like I still had something ahead of me. So I tried to shut it down, told him it wasn't realistic, that I had $17 and no job and no plan. But he didn't argue. He just asked what if it was possible. And I felt this immediate resistance because hope in that moment almost felt dangerous, like setting myself up to fall harder. And then he explained, calm, steady, like he had already worked through the details, that he had businesses, connections, that he could help me get back into school, help with housing, childcare, all the things I couldn't solve on my own. And I just stared at him, because people don't offer that without expecting something. They just don't. And when I asked why, he didn't give me a speech. He just said I was a mother doing my best in a situation that doesn't give second chances, that I had a goal once and hadn't really lost it, just put it aside, and that right now I needed help. And for him, that was enough. And I remember saying I couldn't just take it, because it felt like stepping into something I hadn't earned. And he stopped me gently and said, "Don't think of it as taking. Think of it as getting back to a place where you can give." And that shifted something because that's who I used to be before everything got reduced to just surviving. And when he said I could still become that person, that it wasn't gone, just delayed, I felt it. Small but real hope. And it scared me because I hadn't let myself feel that in a long time. And when he asked me to say yes, not just for tonight, but long enough to actually rebuild, I didn't answer right away. I looked at Emma instead, asleep in that chair with a fry still in her hand, like she didn't even trust the food to still be there when she woke up. And that image stayed with me longer than anything he said because it showed me exactly what her world had become. And in that moment, I realized saying no wasn't strength, it was fear. And I couldn't afford to choose fear anymore. Not for her. So I said yes, quietly, but it felt bigger than anything I had said in a long time. Like crossing a line I couldn't step back over. And after that, things didn't change slowly. They changed fast. 1 week turned into 2, and James followed through on everything without hesitation. He introduced me to his sister Clara, who helped women like me find housing and childcare. And within days I had a small apartment, nothing special, but safe and clean and mine. And that word mattered more than I expected. Emma had a place at a childcare center nearby, and for the first time in months, I had something steady to build around, a routine that didn't feel like it would fall apart overnight. And then he helped me get back into the nursing program, using his connections to move things faster than I thought possible, with a scholarship that covered everything I couldn't afford before. And when they told me I'd start in 6 weeks, I just sat there trying to catch up to my own life because it felt like everything that had been slipping away was suddenly being handed back, piece by piece. And what stayed with me the most wasn't just what he gave, it was that he stayed, he showed up, helped me move, carried boxes, put things together like it mattered, like this wasn't just help from a distance, but something real, something consistent. And that's when I started to believe maybe this time it wouldn't all fall apart again. I didn't realize how much my life had changed until things finally slowed down. Not in a dramatic way, just in the quiet moments when nothing was falling apart and I wasn't bracing for the next problem. And sometimes I still catch myself looking at Emma while she sleeps, just to make sure this is real, that we're not back out there in the cold trying to figure out where to go next. And when I think about that night in the rain, it doesn't feel like some big turning point. It feels like a small decision that ended up meaning everything, because all I really did was say yes when every instinct in me wanted to say no and protect myself. And I used to think being strong meant handling everything alone, not needing anyone, not relying on anyone. But the truth is that mindset nearly broke me, because there is a point where doing everything by yourself isn't strength anymore. It's just survival. And survival doesn't build a life, it just keeps you going. And what I didn't understand back then is that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is accept help when it's real, when it's given without conditions, and trust it enough to let it change something in you. And I'm not saying every situation works out like mine, because it doesn't. And not every person who offers help will mean it the way James did. But I do believe there are moments where life quietly gives you a choice to stay where you are because it feels safer, or to take a step you don't fully understand yet. And those moments don't look big when they happen. They look simple, almost easy to ignore, but they're usually the ones that matter the most later. And if you're in a place right now where everything feels like too much, where you're tired of trying to fix it all on your own, maybe just consider this. You don't have to carry everything by yourself. And if you're on the other side of that, if you're in a position to help someone, even in a small way, don't overthink it, because you never really know how far that moment can reach. I didn't know what would come from saying yes. I just knew I couldn't keep saying no out of fear. And that one choice didn't just change where we ended up. It changed how I see people, how I see myself, and what I believe is still possible. So if this story stayed with you even a little, don't just move on from it. Hold on to that feeling for a second and ask yourself what you might do differently the next time life gives you a moment like that. Because those small decisions, the ones we almost walk past, are usually the ones that end up changing everything. And I need to say this clearly. This story is not advice you should blindly follow. Not every situation is the same, and not every person who offers help has good intentions, so you should never trust someone just because they seem kind. Always think carefully, trust your instincts, and protect yourself first. Your safety comes before anything else. But if this story meant something to you, don't just scroll past it. Take a second, hit subscribe, leave a comment, and tell me what you think or what you would do in that situation. Because your voice matters more than you realize, and someone out there might need to hear it.